Everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Thursday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. It's dress rehearsal day, the final preseason game for the Lakers before next week's opener. What to look for tonight and into next week, we'll tell you next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday. No matter how or where you get your podcast, it's always free. Never behind a paywall. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to hang out with 21,000 subscribers to this channel. People talking Lakers all day, leaving questions for us, which we love. Really love the way that you guys are talking to each other. You get a lot of these long threads of responses and conversations. Really cool to see. Surely is all going to continue to pick up as we get closer to next week's regular season debut, the official kickoff, Andy, of the 2023-24 season in Denver on Tuesday. But there is the business of one more preseason game. That's tonight at home against Phoenix, right?
Yeah, it's going to be against Phoenix. Last I heard, Gabe Vincent and Jalen Hunchifino were considered day-to-day, although Gabe Vincent did practice during Wednesday's session. So it seems like he's on track to play, and Darvin Ham has talked about this, like you said, as a dress rehearsal type game. He was looking to go about 3/4 of what he would consider like a legitimate, at least theoretical rotation that he would use come Tuesday when the games count. So in theory, there should be a lot to take away from this preseason game, particularly if, fingers crossed, Phoenix actually plays their big three and Yusuf Nurkic and, this roster that they are looking to put together, and we can get a look at the Lakers for about 3/4 against a team that a lot of pundits, frankly, have ahead of the Lakers in terms of championship odds.
Boo! No, it's a legitimate position to take. Look, Phoenix is, objectively speaking, one of the most fascinating teams in the NBA because at a time when teams are focusing generally a little bit more on sort of depth, team building, continuity, other stuff. Like there are some exceptions, or you could call what Milwaukee did with Lillard, that kind of star seeking home run, obviously. But Phoenix went.
Boston has also gone the route of making themselves top heavy, although they have more depth in their top heaviness than Phoenix,
and did it for a guy like in Drew Holiday, who not only replaces somebody that they lost in Marcus Smart in many ways in terms of that defensive presence, is a less flashy, he's not a superstar in that way. Guys like us and people who follow the game love Holiday and really recognize his impact. But it's a little bit, at least to me, it's a little bit of a different kind of deal. A lot of stuff we want to talk about tonight, including questions around defense. We got a great viewer comment to the show on the YouTube page, which we intentionally held today, which we'll talk about before the end of the show and all of that stuff. But I do want to ask you, Andy, given that it is dress rehearsal night, as a former theater major, you know how important these things are, the dress rehearsal.
Yes, they are. They're very important. I've been in many a dress rehearsal in my
What
day.
are you looking for? Like, what do you want to see tonight?
Well, there's one thing that struck me that's very Lakers specific, and then one thing that is game specific. As far as Lakers specific, I'm curious to see how much run Cam Reddish gets because he's missed a lot of the preseason with an ankle injury, but the games that he's played, I think he's been very up and down. There have been flashes where he's looked pretty good, pretty active, disruptive defensively, but then there have been other moments where, frankly, he's just been bad and wild. I'm curious to see how much time he gets, because in a lot of ways, I think that speaks
in those first 3 quarters, you mean?
Yeah, in those first 3 quarters. I'm not talking about when they may put the deep reserves out there. I'm talking about the first 3 quarters, because I think ultimately that may end up letting us know just how much Max Christie has that 2-guard backup spot locked up or not. And then as far as this specific game goes, assuming that Phoenix plays its big three and, Nurkic and whatever, I'm really curious to see how the Lakers go about defending them. Like, do they try to ball pressure Beal and Booker and KD, just knowing this is a team that's going to be running without a true floor general? And even though all three of those guys are capable of running sets, it's not the same thing. And you're asking them to do a few things at once. Do they look to load up on two of the three and make one of them beat you? How do they choose that person? Is it Bradley Beal, who just seems like the natural third banana, or is it more matchup dependent? Like, how much do they pay any attention to Yusuf Nurkic at all? Like, do they look to guard more straight up, whether because they're looking to see, can we do it, or even in preseason, or are they not looking to tip their hand at all against a potential playoff opponent and a team that they're going to be seeing a few times pretty early? So I again, assuming both sides play their guys, I think there's both macro and micro to be looking at that'll be interesting.
Well, I look, it's just before I got a couple things that I'm thinking about, but before we get there, I mean, like, to your points, rebounding is a thing. Like, if you're looking for potential vulnerabilities in the Lakers, I think it's still, you could say, particularly if you make that swap with Prince in the starting lineup for Vanderbilt, one of the things that you're giving up, certainly on a relative basis, is rebounding. It's
absolutely,
Vanderbilt does not need to be Dennis Rodman to be a better rebounder overall than Taurean Prince, who's just historically not a particularly strong rebounder. How healthy and productive a guy like Nurkic is, it's going to be obviously a huge part of Phoenix's success or lack thereof this year. But he's a massive human being who can do a lot of damage on the glass if you're not containing him. Part of what makes the Phoenix experiment so fascinating to me, beyond the fact that they genuinely did better in this offseason than I think I or others would have predicted in terms of filling that roster with credible NBA players behind that big three, just because they didn't have cap space to do it. But their minimum deals were pretty good. They managed to bring in Eric Gordon. They the depth play with Grayson Allen and some other people, which sets them up to be able to potentially make a trade later in the year. All that stuff has worked out well for them. And, I think they're sitting there going, and this might remind Lakers fans a little bit of the designs with Russ, only these make much more sense. Like the idea that Bradley Beal, who is an imperfect number one, to say the least, is now going to be getting the second or third best defender that teams have. Like, it's going to be, I think, to me, Andy, tell me if you disagree, a season-long process for the Lakers and other Western Conference contenders to figure out how to defend Phoenix. In the same way that I think teams are going to have to figure out, like, if the Lakers shooting is what they've shown this preseason, really, like, how do you attack that? Where do you attack that? Because there are all kinds of ball movers everywhere, and you can't just take the ball out of LeBron's hands anymore, because D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reaves and Anthony Davis is a good passer. Like, there are way too many people here who can move the ball. That's that sort of year-long chess match among the really good teams in the conference is one of the things I'm looking forward to, because matchups make playoff, the dictate how the playoffs go. And I just feel like it's going to be this season-long feeling out process where every game is going to have nuance that really makes a difference.
Yeah, and it's going to have nuance, but it's also going to have black and white implications, because the West, if things play out the way people expect, it is loaded. It's going to be super competitive. So you're going to be figuring things out on the fly and getting data, so to speak. But at the same time, you can't afford to just be in research mode. Like, you need to win these games.
You got to win some games. You got to win games.
So, like, it's going to be really interesting just to see how teams go about figuring out their opponents, how they go about trying not to show too much in the beginning, try to keep certain things secret in their back pocket, but then also recognize, all right, you know what? We got to take this thing out of our back pocket because we got to win
the game.
We got to win this game tonight.
A couple things I want to mention about tonight's game. We want to get to that viewer comment, ask some questions about the Lakers defense and more rankings around the league. Lots to talk about. We'll get to it next.
Locked On Lakers is brought to you by Jace Medical, and in the past few years with the pandemic, various natural disasters, and other unforeseen emergencies have taught us anything, it's that we must expect the unexpected. All of a sudden, there can be supply chain shortages for medication, and you're unable to get your medications in a timely manner. The solution is the Jace Case, a personalized emergency medication kit that contains 5 essential antibiotics that treat the most common and deadly bacterial infections. Jace Medical allows you to customize your Jace Case with dozens of add-on medications as well for your family needs. Jace is continually working to expand their medication offerings. In those recent efforts, they've added ivermectin, an anti-parasitic medication for conditions like scabies and lice. You can also buy a gift card for your family or for your loved ones so they can get a Jace Case of their own. Go to jacemedical.com and enter the code LOCKEDON at the checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON at jasemedical.com.
So one of the things, Andy, I'm interested in tonight in terms of this dress rehearsal is particularly with Vanderbilt not playing, he's going to be evaluated. Still, the plan is to evaluate him again on Friday. Like what amount of playing time and with whom and all that does Jaxson Hayes get? And then the sort of layout of the Hayes, Wood, Davis thing. Do you see any LeBron at center? Do we see any of those really small lineups in a dress rehearsal type game? I'm curious about that. But it's really the alignment of the bigs. And I say that as much because I'm now much more curious about Hayes than I was before, because he's played better than I think I was expecting in the preseason, which is great. But also I think it is a foreshadowing of potentially some of the issues with Vanderbilt and what his role might be when he comes back.
Apologies for our dog. He is barking right now, and I cannot settle him down. So just trying to ride through this.
Sometimes dogs bark.
Yep, and Bobo is a barker. As far as the question about small ball center looks, I mean, maybe a matchup dictates it, but I'm inclined to say that it's not going to happen, in part because it seems like the Lakers have gone out of their way to try to avoid it happening. So you never
you
know
what I mean? Like the Rui, the LeBron Rui, probably be like maybe Prince.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
But for people to listen, like I still think that's a lineup they're going to use. I just wonder if it's something that they want to rehearse, so to speak, in that way, or if they'll get to it later.
I feel like they got plenty of rehearsal with it last season, and look, LeBron and Rui, I think both acquitted themselves pretty nicely. In against Denver, they were as effective guarding Jokic as anybody, which is to say it's difficult because there's nobody in the league that can truly guard Jokic. And in a lot of ways, guarding Jokic really comes down to just how much can you make him work, but also just how ineffective can you make his outlets and things like that. But I feel like the Lakers have gone so far out of their way to try to prevent having to go small ball center routes, especially given that this is the last preseason game. I would think that we're not going to see much of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure we see it tomorrow. Again, it's more of a consideration about like big picture. The bigger thing I'm interested would be that question of how and the combinations they use Hayes, Wood, and Davis, and then maybe what that means potentially for Vanderbilt, assuming even if he misses Tuesday's opener, he might be back.
Well, I think they consider
some point pretty soon.
I think they consider, and understandably, the three bigs that they have, AD, Wood, and Hayes, that all three in some combination can play together. Like I don't think there's any two of the three that they feel like we can't put those two on the floor together, unless just other than maybe a certain amount of game awareness for both Hayes and Wood, because there are certain, I think, smaller details that neither
It's
one
not
of them.
a lineup you want. That's not the front court you put out in a moment where you really need to make sure you're getting stops.
Right, exactly. But in terms of skill sets meshing together in a way that makes sense, there's no two of the three that I think you can't put on the floor together, at least in theory.
I completely agree. And so, the Lakers, as we've noted, have the wonderful problem of having probably one or two more rotation capable players, especially if somebody like Hayes finds a little bit of a groove. They give him a role that makes sense. He's able to fill it and become that role player that he hasn't been able to become in New Orleans. If that's the case, they have at least one or two extra guys that are rotation capable that can't be in the rotation because you just don't have that kind of availability for minutes. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. There was a really interesting. It's the last week, I guess, before the regular season, Andy. It's been filled with more lists. We talked about ESPN's rankings, where LeBron and AD and Reaves, the three guys who finished in the top 100, landed. The Ringer put out a similar rankings. They have Anthony Davis and LeBron at 10th and 11th, I believe, and Reaves at 60th. So very similar to the 9, 10, and 66 that those guys were in the ESPN rankings. And then there was another very interesting ranking from the Sporting News where, God bless them, because this is not easy. They tried 1 through 100 to rank players strictly on defense.
Yeah, shout out to Stephen Rowe from the Sporting News, because this was not an easy
task.
That
is insane.
Yeah. As far as the Ringers list, I think it just sort of cements this consensus that the Lakers have two top 10-ish players in the league, and they are among a handful of teams that have that. And then they have another player that's about middle of the top 100 in Reaves, and that's it. And I don't think it takes away from the idea that the Lakers have enviable depth, because I do think that's the case. They have a lot of depth. I think they have an unusual amount of depth in terms of just legit NBA players that you don't wonder whether or not they are worthy to be in a rotation. But it just raises the question of, how much star power or close to it is necessary to win a championship. As far as the Sporting News list, what I thought was interesting about this was, with AD coming at third, the only two players ahead of him were Draymond Green at 1 and Alex Caruso at 2, and then Jarred Vanderbilt at 30. There's nobody else on the Lakers that made the list, and frankly, there's nobody else that I think you would make a strong argument for. But what I found interesting about that is it's basically the same roster that the Lakers had in the playoffs last year in terms of the rotation guys, other than you're losing Dennis Schroeder, and I think he's seen as being subbed in by Gabe Vincent. Neither one of those guys was on this top 100. Dennis Schroeder is not on it. Gabe Vincent's not on it. But even if you think Schroeder is better than Vincent, I don't think anybody would argue the gap is that big between them defensively. It's essentially the same roster that didn't have many guys that would be considered top 100 defenders. And the Lakers last year, by NBA.com's metrics, were the 12th best defense in the regular season and 5th best in the playoffs. They were just a 10th of a point in defensive rating behind Denver, who won the whole thing. And other than Denver, no team that outlasted the Lakers had as good of a defense. Like, the Lakers' defensive rating in the playoffs was better than Miami's.
And critically to that point, it was also better, significantly better after the deadline.
Yeah. So I think it speaks to what can be accomplished by really good schemes and really good buy-in. And it's just going to be an interesting test to see all year how many truly plus defenders do you need versus how many somewhere between neutral and minus defenders can you afford to have. I think that's going to be interesting to watch.
It gets really hard to measure defense, especially you start getting, the 60s, 70s, 80s, like, it gets very difficult to try to really figure this stuff out. And then, if you want to go through some of these rankings, a lot of the players that might rank out high in these defensive ratings and stuff aren't players who are actually going to be on the floor for some of these teams in moments that matter. So that's a big thing too. And so, you look at the players that the Lakers will be using in crunch time. Gabe Vincent is considered undersized, but a very credible team defender. Austin Reaves, while I guess we learned in the World Cup, he's post-upable, which is a tactic I would love to see teams attack him with.
He has certain weaknesses defensively.
He does, but as a team defender over the course of a couple of years, has always rated out as very effective. And they have Hachimura, who found a really good niche on the Lakers, next to LeBron, next to AD. LeBron, when it really matters, can still crank it up and defend. When you're just not going to do it for 82 games. Or even 62, or even really 42. But but in some of the ones in there that really matter, in the moments that matter, he will. So I don't worry about it, because you're right. It is scheme, it is team defense, it is awareness, it is following the principles so that each person on the string, so to speak, is doing the same thing at the same time. That makes up for significantly any shortcomings that people have individually. I want to get to this reader comment or listener comment, viewer comment, whatever we call them now. We're definitely not readers. That's the old way. But we wanted to get to it yesterday. Didn't have time. We will do that next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel, and you can celebrate this NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, you bet $5, just $5, you get $200 back in bonus bets, guaranteed. And you can use those bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, futures, all sorts of options. And the app is really easy to use. It's fun. All of those different choices right there at your fingertips. And of course, there are NBA props that you can bet on. Opening night, the Lakers are, as of this recording, 5.5-point dogs on the road against the Denver Nuggets. LeBron is a 50-1 bet to win MVP with his 39th birthday in a few months. That is amazing. Anthony Davis, 30-1 to win MVP. It would be really great sign for the Lakers if he does. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL.
So I mentioned that we love, Andy, to get comments on the YouTube page. We love to use them in the show. And this was one, particularly with this sort of dress rehearsal, the final game before we get into the regular season, we thought was really a perfect one for today, because you and I have both been very positive about where we think this is going. We think the preseason has basically borne out what we and frankly most people who cover the league think, which is a good team. Anthony Davis and LeBron James are healthy. It's got depth. It's got balance. We've got some shooting now in Los Angeles, which is an unusual thing. So if it plays out with health, they ought to be pretty good. Quasar Explorer at Quasar Explorer on YouTube writes the following. Hey, Andy and Brian. Hey. I've generally been surprised by the seeming untempered optimism for the Lakers this season among media members like yourself and fans in general. Personally, I am much more skeptical about the relative competitiveness of the current roster in the conference and the league as a whole. Most of the issues I have are based on the lack of consistent track record for both Vincent and Hachimura, the low impact of Prince last year in Minnesota, and what I consider to be the underperformance of James, Hayes, and Wood so far in the preseason. Without focusing on the specific merits of my concerns, if the team is healthy and my instincts turn out to be true, such as they are stuck in the morass of a play-in or things like that, what do you think should be the reaction organizationally? Love the comment, love the questions, cannot ignore the merits of your concerns in answering the question, and so we will, but there's some interesting stuff in there, because if you are going to be skeptical, Andy, you might look at Hachimura and Vincent and wonder about a truly consistent track record, particularly in the regular season, especially as shooters. Taurean Prince, I think he's a good player, and he's going to play well here, but he was available for a mid-level. That smaller
biannual. biannual
The
exception.
biannual, right. Correct. Thank you.
Which is even less money.
Which I was about to say, which is actually less. So that is reflective to some degree of what people think about him. And then the underperformance of James, Hayes, and Wood in the preseason, I can accept Wood as an underperforming. I'm not sure what you want from LeBron and Jaxson Hayes, but among those
LeBron's shooting numbers have been down, like across the board. They have not been great in the preseason. I'll be honest, I don't particularly care. I've been much more concerned given LeBron's coming off that torn foot tendon. Yeah. How does he look? He looks lively. You know, if he's shooting 43% from the field, under 30% from behind the arc, and 60% at the line during the regular season, then I'm going to be really worried about, okay, we've reached the beginning of the expiration date and it's pretty obvious, but those being the stats in the preseason, I don't particularly care.
But in terms of like some of those other points that he's making, does anything stick out to you as like, okay, that's fair, I get it, like that makes you think that we're overreacting and too much in a positive direction?
I mean, everything he brings up is, I think, fair game to wonder about. I'm just not particularly concerned about it. I mean, just having seen how well Rui fits on this particular team, if you want to be skeptical about how well Rui would fit on the other 28 teams in the league, you know, not counting the Wizards who moved him, that's fine. I just don't care. Like, it doesn't matter to me if Rui could, you know, replicate this in Milwaukee or in Chicago or Sacramento. Like, what I don't care. Like, I care how he performs on this team. And on this team, I think he is a very good fit, both on the court and culturally. And I think the reasons for this actually make sense. You know, Gabe Vincent does have to prove himself as the three-point shooter that we saw in the playoffs. But even if he comes down to earth a bit, we know what he can do defensively. We know what he can do attitudinally and just how he fits with this group. You know, if he shoots in the low 30s from behind the arc, but everything else works, you know, similar to what we saw with Dennis Schroeder last year, you can find ways to make that work for a deep playoff run. So, yeah, I'm not discounting Quasar when it comes to the idea of, could this stuff happen or is it fair to worry about it? Sure. I'm just not worried about it right now.
Right. And, you know, look, I mean, Vincent was a pretty high volume 3-point shooter in Miami last year, playing 26 minutes a night. I don't know if he's going to play 26 minutes a game with the Lakers, but he's probably going to play most nights. What do you think? 18 to 25, somewhere in there?
Yeah. So depends how much he closes.
Right. He's going to get legitimate playing time. So, okay, even if he doesn't take 5 3-pointers a game, he's probably going to take 2 or 3 or 4. So, like, the percentages do matter. But what I like about this team and why I am worried a little bit less now than I might have been before is, to Quasar's point, the Lakers are kind of built like an airplane now. They have a lot of redundant systems. Like, it's okay if Vincent doesn't shoot necessarily in that, you know, playoff numbers that he did last year, because there's Prince and, you know, Russell and, you know, Christian Wood has a very strong track record as an outside shooter. I didn't love his preseason performance, but like, there's no reason to think that he suddenly isn't going to be able to shoot other than he put on a Lakers jersey. You know, LeBron,
it's compelling reason.
It's you should give it weight. There's no question. You know, LeBron, I think, I'm not counting on LeBron to be 40%, but I do think he'll be a little bit better than he was last year. You know, Austin Reaves has there's every reason to believe that Reaves is a 37 to 41, you know, somewhere pretty strong in there. Like, there is that shooting. And then, you know, could Hachimura and Vincent both fail in the regular season? Yes. But, well, one of them could pan out. Like, they have a lot of redundant systems in their thing. And then there's going to be somebody who does better than you think. Max Christie is going to come in and be, wow, you know, we're in a December and he's in the high, you know, mid to high 30s, you know, taking 2 or 3 a game or something. There are going to be surprises to the positive. And I think one mistake that is easy to make is just assuming that all the surprises will be negative. It's possible, but generally speaking, that's not how it works. There's always somebody who does a little bit better than you were expecting too. And assuming those types of things happen, I think the Lakers are in really good shape. Like I was not disappointed by anybody's preseason performance other than I haven't loved Wood. But I think that's worthy of some time. And, we didn't see a ton of Vincent, and obviously Vanderbilt hasn't played, hasn't played in a while. So I think I've been just haven't found a lot of negative stuff to really grab onto over the course of the preseason.
Yeah, and I guess then to answer the other part of Quasar's question really quick, like what do I want to see the front office do if, say, 25 games in the season they're underperforming? I would say just whatever the issue is, be as hyper specific as possible about fixing it, assuming you think it can be fixed through a trade. Like what you can't do is take on the attitude of we are in the LeBron business. We are, we have to try to leverage this as much as possible. So do something. Like it can't just be a big swing for the sake of a big swing or because it's what LeBron and AD want, because that's how you end up with Russell Westbrook. And I don't mean that as a shot at Russ. I'm just saying when you make a move that you can at best see some upside in terms of taking a little bit of scoring or ball handling pressure off LeBron, but you open up a ton of other issues that are somewhere between quite possible and dead ass obvious gonna happen. Like you can't do that. Like whatever needs fixing, fix it specifically. And if for some reason everybody, the front office, us, whoever was just wrong, sometimes you just got to admit you were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But
look, I mean, if everybody would have been wrong, and look, health aside, guys get hurt,
which Quasar said, health notwithstanding.
But then everybody's wrong, and you look at the process and you go like, what assumptions did we make that turned out to be incorrect? But it's very difficult to find process problems, which has not been an issue, which has not been the case with the Lakers in previous seasons, but quite easy to find process problems. This less so. And I will say the other thing, and we'll wrap it here. The Lakers are structurally far better off and far better equipped to make tweaks this year than they were last year. They managed to do it, but they had to thread a needle, and kudos to Pelinka in the front office for being able to do that with Westbrook. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go to see the show, hang out with upwards of 21,000 subscribers to the channel. We will see everybody on Friday following this big dress rehearsal game. Get you ready for the weekend and into next week when the Lakers kick off the season against Denver on Tuesday. See everyone tomorrow.